Today on Design, Build, and Fix, we're going to show you how to install the lower base cabinets for our kitchen remodel series. Now, if you didn't watch the previous video, which shows you how to install the upper cabinets, you're definitely going to want to make sure you go back and watch that first, because there's a lot of information that I cover in that video that I take for granted when I show you how to install the lower cabinets. I'm going to put the link for that video right up there. You can go ahead and click that and then come back to this one later. And as always, if you like the content, make sure you click the subscribe button, and we'll show you how to get this thing done. So today we're going to start the lower cabinets. I've already placed a couple of them into place. They're just sitting there. I have a corner unit here and I have a standalone unit over here. You're almost always going to want to start in a corner unit and work your way out. Unless you have a standalone unit, you can either start with either one. I'm going to choose to start with a standalone unit before I start to tackle the corner unit, because that's a little more difficult and I kind of want to get into the flow of things before I get going. Biggest thing you need to understand about installing lower cabinets is that they have to be level, left to right, and front to back. And more importantly, especially if you're putting a granite countertop on top of it, they have to be perfectly flat between each one of those lower base units. If you have one that might be up 1/8 of an inch, or one that's down 1/8 of an inch, and the next one's up and down, you're going to have voids in there, and basically what's going to happen over time, if you put a little bit extra weight on those countertops, that granite's going to crack. So you really want to make sure everything's perfectly flat and level on the base units, front and back, left to right. So we'll show you how we get this thing done. So when installing a base cabinet, that has to line up with a cabinet that's already been installed above it, next to an appliance like a refrigerator. We have to make sure that the base cabinet wall is in line with the top cabinet wall. Find yourself a long level, put it on there, kind of put the base cabinet where you think it's going to go, slide it over so it's exactly right in line, and then you have to go ahead and shim it. We'll show you how to do that next. So when installing a base cabinet, you have to make sure it's perfectly level, left to right, front to back. You achieve this by basically putting the cabinet where you know you want it to be, and then put shims in the back corner, one in the front corner on this side. You'll have one on the front corner over here, and then one on the back corner there. It may not require one in each corner, depending upon how level the floor is and how plumb the walls are. Sometimes you won't need any. Now, if this was a cabinet that was going to go next to another cabinet, it's very important that you make sure that there's no lip here. Make sure that it's perfectly flat between this cabinet and that cabinet, especially if you're putting granite on top of it. A lot of times granite fabricators will actually have the cabinet installer come back and fix cabinets that may not be perfectly flat. So now that the cabinet has been leveled all the way around with the shims on the floor, it's very important that you start to put shims in the back, because we have to screw through the nailing plate into the wall where the studs are. And the process of finding those studs is very similar to how you did in the cabinet. Luckily for us, we know the studs to the left of this outlet, so we can just bring it straight down and know we're going to pre-drill through here. Now, if there is a gap behind the nailing flange and the wall, you have to put a shim in there. If you don't, what's going to happen is going to take that cabinet, it's going to lift it back up, and it's not going to be level anymore. So it's important that you just slide one in there. I have another gap over here. Stud's going to be somewhere in here, so I'm just doing this to show you. You're going to slide another one back in there, and then pre-drill like you did on the upper cabinets and screw it in. Then you can open the door. Same process of finding where you're going to pre-drill and screw, just like you did on the upper cabinets. It's no different. The only difference, make sure you put a shim there. So now that the cabinet is completely installed, you're going to have shims that stick up above. You have shims that are on the floor that are going to stick out. Just grab yourself a relatively sharp utility knife, score it, pops right off, installation done. On to the next one. So installing base units, you always start in a corner unless you have a standalone like I just showed you. You want to do that first, that's fine, because it's not connected to anything. But when you're installing base cabinets, that starts in the corner, and you're going to go both ways with it. You always start in the corner. Now, the unit that we have here is a little bit more difficult to install because we have our corner cupboard, then we have a dishwasher next to it, and over here we have a stove. Now, because we have two open cavities on each side of this corner unit, they've installed side panels. That makes it a little bit more difficult because now your wall has to be perfectly square in order for it to go in exactly right. If you don't have, if you have cabinets next to each other on each side of the corner unit, it's relatively easier because they literally have just a backing around the round portion of it without the sides, and it fits in the corner a little bit easier, and it accommodates the unsquare corners. Well, a little more difficult because we have a couple things to do, and so let me show you how we take care of that. All right, so how do we install this corner unit? First thing you want to do is to put your corner in the best you can and as square as you can based on the wall. Now what I did is, there's no way, based on how these walls are and the floor is, to get this 24 inches away from the wall, because it's not hitting on this side. It's not hitting on this side, but on the back, somewhere in there down towards the floor, it's hitting the wall, so it can't go back either side any further. What I did is I marked on the wall, should come out about 36. Definitely you can see that it's 35 and almost 3/4, because we do have a 1/4 inch reveal here. So that's relatively close where it's supposed to be. Same thing happens on this side. I marked the wall at 36 and we're about 35 and 3/4. So we're pretty close to where it needs to be, left and right coming out of the wall. But we're definitely going to be more than 24 away from the wall here. We're at about 24 and a half here-ish. And so that's pretty close to where we want it to be. So now what we want to do is to make sure this thing is perfectly level. And so as you can see from the floor, I have shimmed in the front and the back. I've shimmed in the front and in the back. It didn't require any. And then what I did is I found the studs on the wall. We know there's a stud there, and so I transferred that mark down. Very important, make sure if there's a gap here, you always put the shims there so this doesn't suck the cabinet up and make it out of level. Same thing I did on this side. Now this side, there's no outlet here, so how did I find where the stud was? Well, the good news is our cabinet above it, when we hung the cabinet above it, we know that we had a screw there, and so I measured from the inside. We're at 3 inches. Let me show you. We're at 3 inches, and so basically I came down here and measured over 3 inches. I put a mark there, it's at 3 inches, and then from there I know I'm 3 inches from there over, so I took it from the corner and I measured over, and it says that it's 27 and a half. Went down to the wall, 27 and a half, and put my shim, marked the cabinet, and now I know that's exactly where that has to go. So this cabinet is ready to be screwed in. Now I don't necessarily have to put one in the bottom, but I'm going to. I almost always do it top and bottom just to make sure it's really secure. This cabinet is now set. Now we have to deal with this one, and we have to make sure that it's perfectly level from this cabinet over to that cabinet. Now normally, well, let's put it this way. This has to be level with that one. So basically what I did is I put the shims on the floor like I normally do, marked the walls like we normally do, and got it all set and ready to go. So now what I want to do is to make sure that I have from here to here 30 inches, because it has to match up with what's on top of it. I personally like to make sure that this is about 30 and a quarter. Gives you a little bit more wiggle room, even though the top is going to be 30 from here to here. If the stove has a little bit more wiggle room, and if it's off by maybe an 1/8 inch on each side, you're really not going to see it. It's going to allow your stove to go in and out a little bit easier. So now that this one is perfectly level, basically coming off of from this side, I put the level on it and made that perfectly level like it's supposed to be front and back. Then what you're going to want to make sure that you do is that the distance that you have in the front here, from here to here, which I have about 30 5/8, you're going to want to make sure that you have about the same here in the back. And I have 30 and, heavy, like 9/16, or 30 and a heavy half, which is perfectly fine. Now over here we have a 1/4 inch reveal and we have no reveal. But if I go in the front here, I should be at about 30 1/4, which I am. The one last thing that you're going to want to know, if you don't have a unit like this and you basically have no sides to it and it has a curved back to it, you're going to want to make sure that you take and put that perfectly square off of another cabinet with a straight edge. So you grab a straight edge like a level, put it on here, make sure that this is perfectly straight, and then make sure that this part here lines up with it and it's perfectly straight. Now, it's not going to happen here because this isn't 24 off the wall. It's actually going to be different. So as you can see, it's not perfectly square, but the good news is we have a countertop that's going over this, and it's going to have 1.5 inch overhang, and so that extra 1/2 inch will be covered up with a still 1 inch overhang, and it should be fine. So now that these two units are relatively installed, now I have to do is pre-drill and screw my screws into it. And then we're going to deal with the sink base and how we're going to cut that in. So we have a 4-drawer base that we have to screw to the bottom of the cabinet to the wall. So we got to take this drawer out. Let me show you how we take it out. Bring it all the way out, and usually underneath there's some clips that here. Pull the clips towards you, you'll hear them click, and the drawer pops off. Now, inside the cabinet, we have to screw that in. As you can see, I've already done that. Measure from the inside, pre-drill, and screw it in just like you normally do. But now that you have that finished, how do we get the drawer back in? Well, on the bottom of here, we have these areas here, and we have these areas here. This is what you actually pushed. Don't do anything with it. Just line up those guys with it, slide it in. You should hear it click. Bring it all the way out, push it back in, do it one more time, and the drawer has been installed. Installation of the corner unit is done, and the 4-drawer base is complete. The only thing left for me to do is to cut that last shim up there in the top. That corner cabinet and that 4-drawer base is perfectly level. Now we have to deal with this side. We have a dishwasher that's going here and a 36-inch sink base, which is supposed to be centered on that window. We'll tell you about how we're going to deal with that and how we're going to deal with those pipes. Now if you take a look at it, I'm not going to cut a huge hole in the back of this brand new cabinet in order to get those. We're going to actually cut those pipes and put in different shutoffs, and we'll show you how we're going to transfer those lines to the back of this. I'm going to show you how we're going to position this cabinet here next. The positioning of the sink base usually happens by a window, and it should be centered. In this case, if I were to center it on the window, it's not going to allow me enough room for my dishwasher. I know that because what I did is I found the center of the window, and I put a mark on the wall with a level, and I drew this down, and I carried it down to the floor, and that's going to be that mark right there. Let me zoom in and see if you can see it. It's that mark there. And if I were to actually measure that, that comes up to about 24 inches. It's actually 24 1/4 inches. Now this cabinet over here, this one down here, has a 1/4 inch reveal. So at 24 1/4, if I were to put the edge of my cabinet right at that point at 24 1/4, by the time I come forward and the sink base, which we're going to put in, has a 1/4 inch reveal to it, it's going to bring it back. It'll actually put it exactly at 24 inches like I have marked here. That's exactly what you need for a dishwasher. However, I find that it's kind of tight. I like to do 24 1/4 because the last thing you want to have to do is move cabinets after the fact. And really, if we're not centered on the window by about an 1/8 inch on each side, are you going to notice it? Probably not. So what I did is I marked where the edge, the outside edge of the sink base is going to be. And that's actually going to be 24 3/4. And let me show you how I came up with that number. So at 24 1/4, that's the exact edge of the sink base. Then if I add 1/4 for the reveal, that's the edge of the sink base outside surface. But I want to make this about 1/4 inch bigger. So I added 1/4, so I'm at 24 3/4 of an inch is where the outside edge of that sink base going that way is going to be. So what I'm going to do is line up my sink base right on this line, get it nice, plumb, true, and level, and go from there. Now, if you take a look at what we have going on here on the wall, we have a lot of things that we have to deal with on the wall. We have 3 pipes and a drain line. So what I did is on the wall, on the floor I drew a line where I wanted that sink base to be, and I drew a level line up from there and I put it on here. So that's the sink base edge. So that means this is the outer edge of the sink base. And then from there, we have a 1/2 inch for the sidewall of the sink base and the rest of it's open space. I want to be able to transfer these these marks and drill a hole through the back of our sink base. And the way we do that is I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to put it at the line, bring it down, and measure it. Now this says 12 3/8. Now keep in mind, that's 12 3/8 from the outside edge. And then I wrote it on the wall there. The next one is 18 to the center of the pipes. I wrote that on the wall there. And then I did the same thing for the drain, 26 1/2. Then what I did is I measured it from the floor up to the center, floor up to the center, floor up to the center, and put those on the wall. This one, both the pipes are 18 1/8, and over here it says 20 inches from the floor up. So I have all my markings, and now what I want to do is to transfer those markings to the back side of my sink base. I'm going to transfer the marks that I have on the wall for the holes that I have to cut for all those pipes. And this is the left edge as you're looking at it from the front of my sink base. And remember, on the floor we marked it from the outside edge here. And so that first number was 12 3/8. And if you're not sure, just look at where you wrote it on the wall. I marked 12 3/8 on the back. Next one for the next drain, or the next line, was 18 inches. Mark that on the back. And the next one was 26 1/2. So now I have those marks where they are in association to that from the left edge. Now I want to transfer those lines down. All I'm going to take is a framing square, a good size one. It's on the back side, it's not going to matter. And now we know from the floor, the drain, which is going to be the farthest one over, is 20 1/2 up. So I'll mark the center. And now I have the centers of those. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is you're always going to cut these from the back side first until the pilot goes through. And once the pilot goes through, then you can cut it from the other side. Now this is 1 1/4 inch. That's going to be big enough. We do have escutcheon rings, which look like this. And these are definitely bigger than the 1 1/4 hole I'm going to put. That's going to give me some leeway left and right to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. And we're going to deal with this drain line here a little bit differently, and we'll show you how. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that this is exactly where it's supposed to be by kind of moving it into place to make sure it's right. before you drill holes that you really didn't need. So let me check and I'll be back. So I took the cabinet, slid it into place. Looks like it's actually going to be exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to start to pre-drill these holes. I'm going to start in the back. Go through until it actually goes through and starts to hit the ring there. So I need to drill a hole. It's about 2.5 or 3 inches in diameter, and unfortunately I forgot my hole saw that has the 3-inch diameter drill on it. Not a big deal. I'm just going to saw cut this from the back side with a circular saw and plunge cut it. It'll look like a square hole with something round going through, and it's not going to be a big deal because it's going to be in the back of a sink base with a dish or with a garbage disposal in there, all kinds of stuff, and people aren't going to see it. So we're going to get this cut and hopefully show you how to install this. So now we got to change these shutoffs because I drilled small holes for it. This is never going to go around it, so we're going to cut these off and put on new shutoff valves. If you don't know how to do that, I'll put a link in the description below that shows you a separate video on how to do this. All right, the water's back on. So what I like to do is just to open this up a hair because there's probably some air that's been trapped in there, and you probably won't see a leak for a few 4 or 5 minutes or whatever. So you'll hear air coming out. As soon as you see the water coming out. All right, so water's coming out. Clean up whatever's sprayed around. Check the back. There's no leaks. That one's good. We'll try this one. This time I'm going to cover up the part. Come out a little bit faster. If it's going to leak, it's probably going to come from the bottom part. Check those. No leaks. Look like we're good. Don't forget to put your ferrule and your nuts back on the top. So the sink base has been placed. One of the first things that I did is as we showed you in the past, we drew our lines. We got it close to where we wanted to. And then what I did is made sure that this was perfectly level with our corner unit. And if you take a look from there all the way to there, there is no rock, no teeter in my 6-foot level. And oh, by the way, 4-foot level would work, but a 6-foot's going to get you a lot further, and it's going to span those 3 things to make sure it's perfectly level and flat for a granite. So I shimmed in the front corner to make this corner level with this. I moved the level back to the back. Did the same process, put a shim down there. And once I knew that this and this was perfectly level, I then moved on to the sink base. And when I moved on to the sink base, I made sure that the level was on this one also, and made sure that there was no teeter on that, making sure that it was perfectly level. I then moved it to the back. And in order to make that front level, I had to put a shim in the front, and then to level the back, I shimmed the back. And then from there, it should be perfectly level, left to right, which it actually is. And we're good to go. Now, notice on the wall, it's tight at the bottom and open at the top. Not a big deal because the dishwasher is going to cover that. And there's actually another cabinet over here that we're going to install next, so we're not going to see that gap. And so, like we did in the past for the wall cabinets and the base cabinets, found the stud, marked it, put shims behind it. I'm going to pre-drill and screw into that. Same thing's going to happen down at the bottom. As you can see my mark, but I got a mark down there where I'm going to pre-drill and screw into, and then this sink base is installed. Now, one of the things you're going to want to make sure that you check before you screw this in is to make sure that you have your predetermined amount, which for me was 24 1/4. Kind of hard to do this with one hand, but trust me, I measured it, and the distance from here to there is 24 1/4. The installation of this last cabinet is a good example of all the techniques you're going to be using to install a base cabinet. So the first thing we're going to do, as with all cabinets, is make sure if you have one cabinet that's going to be screwed to another cabinet, make sure that you pre-drill your holes. I pre-drilled one there, down there, and one on the bottom. Make sure those are pre-drilled before you actually slide it into place. Now we want to make sure that this cabinet is going to be the same height as this cabinet. So I would take a few shims, put them in the back corner on the floor, put some on the front underneath here, slide the cabinet into place and let it rest on it, and see how level you get this point and this point. If it's relatively close, you're probably going to be good. But you have to make sure that the front is perfectly level. So these shims that I put on down here, and you can see I've already taken them off, or I've already cut them. Move those in and out until they're perfectly flat, until this is perfectly level. Once this is perfectly level, then you're going to address this side of the cabinet. Throw some shims here in the front corner, some shims in the back corner, and make this cabinet perfectly level. Perfectly level is preferable. This is perfectly level, but we want to make sure that this is perfectly flat, because if you have any variances in the granite, it's going to, or possibly could cause that granite to crack. So you want to make sure that this is perfectly flat. Same thing here in the back is perfectly flat. And you want to make sure from the cabinet that's over here all the way across is perfectly flat, so there is no variances. Once you have the cabinet perfectly flat with the other cabinets and perfectly level, now what you want to do is come through here, put on your quick grip clamps, squeeze them on, and when you squeeze those together, make sure that your seam here is perfectly flat, flush, all the way down. Adjust the cabinet in or out in order to do so, and once you have it perfectly flush, tighten your quick grip clamps down, and then you can go ahead and screw those in. Now, one of the things that I'm showing you here is this is a sink base, and the sink base normally has a false front to it, which is what we have here. It comes off pretty easily. As you can see here, we have some clips on both sides, and we have some clips on this. All it does is it's on here. All you're going to do is pull it off, and it should come straight off relatively easily. You do want to be careful because these clips are only plastic. Once those clips are off, it makes it easier to put on your quick grip clamps. So now that it's perfectly flush, put those screws in. Next, we want to make sure that the front line of this cabinet is perfectly straight. So what I normally do is take the longest level that I have, or a straight edge, put it on the front of it, like I've done here, and make sure it's perfectly straight. Now, you're going to find that a lot of walls in the houses are in and out. They're not perfectly straight. So now that I made the front perfectly straight, you're going to find that the distance here could be bigger or smaller than the distance here in the back between the cabinets. That's okay, because the front is perfectly straight. So what I do is I put a shim through the front, and then I shim the back. As long as the front is still perfectly straight, I pre-drill and screw these cabinets together. So now that we have the front perfectly straight, the top's perfectly flat, perfectly level, shims have been adjusted, now it's like we've normally done. You're going to mark your studs, pre-drill, screw it in, mark your studs, pre-drill, screw it in. Same thing's going to happen on the bottom. Once that's set, put your doors back on, put your false front back on, and this cabinet is installed. Here's what it looks like with the shutoff valves installed and the escutcheon rings have been applied. As you can see, There's a little slice in those. I point those down. That allows you to put the escutcheon rings on after the shutoff valves have been on. And so it gives a nice finished look. And so there you have it. Completely installed kitchen cabinets, 13 in total. The only thing that's missing is that cabinet there that came screwed up from the cabinet, not square. Not a big deal. We'll place that one in when it comes in here in about a week. But all the cabinets have been installed. Looks really nice. On to the next step, which is templating for the granite countertop. Alright, well thanks for watching another design, build, and fix video. More videos coming out shortly on how to finish up this kitchen remodel. And as always, if you like the content, please click the subscribe button. Alright, we'll see you on future videos.